Hey everybody, welcome here. Excuse me, I got a frog in my throat. Welcome here to TechBeat, where leaders learn, innovate, and grow. I'm so happy to be joined by my friend and guest here today, Romaine Marshall. I'm going to come around, back around, and introduce Romaine here in a moment. My name is Earl Foote. I'm founder, CEO of Nexus IT. We are a white glove outsourced cybersecurity and IT services firm based here in northern Utah and servicing a nationwide footprint. By way of announcements, first of all, we're joining you from the Kiln podcast room here in downtown Salt Lake. We want to thank Kiln for hosting us today. We want to thank Mallory Lovestad, our director of marketing, for being in studio with us today and helping us to produce. We will have a live chat going throughout the hour here. So whatever platform you're joining us from, feel free to add your comments, your questions there. We'll work on getting around to those, throughout the hour, or we will save some time at the end for some question and answer. TechBeat is now on all major podcast platforms: Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, wherever you consume your podcasts. So we'd appreciate your subscription. Go out and subscribe there. That way you can get all these awesome backstories about founders and leaders and all the lessons they've learned in their careers, wherever you're at, gym, the car, the motorcycle, jogging on the trail, whatever it might be. So also, Romaine and I will be on panels at the WebCheck Cybersecurity Expo on April 27th. You can go check out my LinkedIn page to get details and tickets for that. Romaine and I are looking forward to that. Coming up on TechBeat, we have some really cool leaders and guests, so make sure you keep an eye out for those announcements. Later this month on the 26th, we have Jason Klug, CEO of Klugonics. Then in May, we have Jeff Erickson, who's over strategic partnerships at Forecaster and a prominent local angel investor that most of the community knows and loves dearly, actually, as well. Let's see, we'll have Dustin Kenyon and Rob Pilecki, co-founders of Washi, on to tell their story. Should be a fun one. They do toilet seats as a service, kind of an interesting offering there. In June, we have Monty Deer, the CEO of Kizik. We'll have Johnny Hanna, Derek Miner and Greg Trimble, the co-founders of Lemonade Stand, coming on. Paul Shin, who the community also knows and loves, and Andrea Guthrie, who is actually the chief strategy officer here at Kiln. She'll be on with me in the coming months. So keep an eye out for all of those upcoming episodes. All right, let's get to the man of the hour, my friend Romaine. Romaine and I have known each other for a number of years. We've run in similar circles in the cybersecurity space. So Romaine his bio says he's a cybersecurity lawyer. I'm going to tell you he's one of the foremost cybersecurity lawyers in the country. He has represented some major cases and major brands. He's with Polsinelli, a national law firm that opened a Utah office 6 months ago. He helps organizations protect their data from cybersecurity incidents and privacy violations. He has represented organizations in hundreds of cases involving data breaches, malware attacks, digital asset fraud, and other exploits. Romaine, welcome to TechBeat, my friend.
Thank you, Earl. It's a pleasure to be here.
So happy to have you here with us. The guests will notice that you have a bit of an accent.
A little bit, yeah.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? I think that the background stories of leaders are super inspiring. They're super fun, interesting to get to know people a little bit better. I'd love for our guests to hear those. So tell us a little bit about your background.
You bet. So I was born and raised in New Zealand. Most people know New Zealand to be on the bottom of the earth, South Pacific country of two main islands, the North and the South Island, and I was born and raised in the North Island. On the East Coast, which is this kind of string of small towns and cities. And then my family moved when I was about 10 to the west coast of the North Island in New Zealand, just outside of a place called Hamilton. But I did all my schooling there, country schools at the beginning, and then a private high school in my latter years. And then I came to the US actually after serving an LDS mission I came to the US on a basketball scholarship and this dates me a little bit, to what is now called BYU Idaho, but at the time was Rick's College.
Of all the things, right? Like
Yeah.
Your size and stature, you'd think that you came to play either American football or rugby, right?
Yeah.
But you came to play basketball.
I did, and the irony with that is I went to a high school that had a very, very good rugby team, and I couldn't make the team. And so I was too skinny at the time. And so the coaches told me to, look, you're too skinny. You're going to get hurt out here. Go grow. Go do something else for a year or two, and maybe we'll give you a shot later. And so I went and played basketball. The school I was at also had a good basketball program, although in New Zealand, I may have been one of 200 people that played basketball at the time. There's a few more, but it wasn't a popular sport. It's become more popular, but I took to it decently, and then wanted to explore what it was like playing here, and then coming here for school too. New Zealand's education system, they don't offer athletic scholarships. That's a very novel concept, although university rugby teams and that kind of thing is a big deal. It's not like it is here. And so that was my way over.
Yeah.
And I've overstayed.
So you ended up at Rick's / BYU Idaho.
Yep.
And from there, tell us a little bit about then, how your college, career evolved, and how you ended up going into law and ultimately cybersecurity, right? Which is a kind of an interesting discipline. The reality is there's not a massive quantity of attorneys that focus in on, cyber and data privacy.
Definitely not in this part in Utah or this region. But I had a couple of professors up in Idaho. Political science was my major, who encouraged me to look into law school. I didn't grow up around lawyers. I didn't know in detail what lawyers did. All I knew about lawyers was the American TV shows, Law and Order, LA Law, Ally McBeal. Those kinds of shows, and it looked fun. Of course, what they did, the way they portrayed it. But I never gave it serious thought until professors nudged me in that direction. And then when I transferred down to BYU in Provo, they have a pretty established pre-law program there, or at least a career services office that talks about it. But even then, I wasn't seriously considering it. It was just trying to get through one semester at a time in my major with political science. And it wasn't until 2 weeks before the cutoff was for the application deadline that I thought about it seriously. Quickly got my application in, took the LSAT, and then just walked across the street. Graduated with my degree. BYU's law school is, at the time and still is, one of the best in the country for value. I think it's a top 20 law school now, but what stood out to me at the time, I was a foreign student. I lost my athletic scholarship due to some injuries, due to an injury, and I was essentially a migrant worker for those last 2 years of my undergrad. And so I was just looking for a law school that was economical, and BYU ticked that box.
With a decent reputation,
and with a decent reputation. A reputation that got better after I left. But I went.
Is that because you left?
Yeah, because I left. Okay, now we can start focusing on improving our reputation. But so I went there 3 years at law school. For those that don't know, it's very theory based. And law school was based on a casebook method, which is, and this has been popularized by shows, The Paper Chase and others. It's all about the Socratic method and being prepared for class every day to get called on. And to get called on about your reading of the material and what you think, or wherever the professor drives the conversation. So it's a very narrow way of learning the law, but it's useful because it's intense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there's a rigor that's required and is developed and most useful for when you practice. It's the rigor. It's not the theory and what you learn, because at least for me, that all went out.
It's kind of cram and be ready.
Yeah.
Cram
Out
and be ready.
in one ear and out the other by the end of each semester.
Yeah.
And then after law school, I was very lucky to be able to do what's called a judicial clerkship, which is working for a judge. I worked for a federal judge, Judge J. Thomas Green, who is phenomenal. I worked for him. He had been practicing law either through a private office or on the bench for 50 years at the time I started working for him. So he was just this wealth of knowledge. I sponged all I could from him, lessons and whys, and I worked for him for a year and a half, which is typical.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started my private law firm career at Curtin and McConkie, which is a historical and very strong, good foundation firm.
Prominent firm here in downtown Salt Lake.
Yeah, here in Utah.
Very well known. Yeah.
And I got a terrific start.
Yeah.
To my career there. And commercial litigation. For those that don't know, commercial litigation refers to, essentially, it's business disputes. I still don't know why they call it commercial litigation. So I had people ask me, so you fight about TV commercials? Why is it called commercial litigation? It means it in the very broadest of contexts. Commercial is in relation to any kind of dispute that could end up in court or and before some kind of tribunal, administrative judge, arbitration or mediation, anything like that. That's what I started my private career, private practice doing, and worked with some excellent attorneys and had some good cases doing that for a couple of years. Then I joined Holland and Hart. Holland and Hart is another great firm. It has a regional footprint. It was a firm that was started in Denver and has been in Salt Lake for about 30 plus years and has a big presence here now and throughout Boise, some of the other Intermountain states too. I spent 14 years at Holland and Hart.
Good long time. Yeah.
A long time and terrific experience there. Worked around great lawyers and learned a lot of lessons and ways to be as a lawyer. I credit Holland and Hart for being the place where I was able to start the practice that I have now and what I consider myself to be, or what I'm trying to be, which is a lawyer that's focusing on cybersecurity and what organizations' obligations are around what they must do to secure the information they get. Not just personal information, but also other types of regulated information that relates to their employees' healthcare, insurance plans, and more specifically, lately, critical infrastructure.
Yeah. And
so that's been my main emphasis since 2015. And what am I now? 2023?
8 years.
8 years. I hope to be doing this for another 15 to 20 years, practicing law. And I hope to be practicing law in the area of cybersecurity, but a little broader than that. Just in the last few years, I've broadened my cybersecurity practice to also include data privacy, which are those laws that relate to what an organization must do once they have information and use it. Cybersecurity is all about what an organization must do to secure it.
Yeah.
Okay, now that we have it and it's secure, what can an organization do with it? And you see this in privacy policies, privacy notices, on websites. At the bottom of a web page, there'll be a privacy policy. And then you'll start seeing more and more of more and more litigation as a result of data privacy as those laws spread across the country. Utah is one of 5 states that passed a consumer privacy law in the last couple of years, and I think most states will follow in the next 3 to 5 years.
And that's something we might dig into a little bit later too. Interesting, and I think very relevant. California was the first, right? CCPA was the first Consumer Privacy Act.
Yes.
And then Utah, were we 4th or 5th? Didn't Connecticut do it about the same time as we did?
You're right. Yeah. Colorado, Virginia, and then Utah and Connecticut. Was very close behind. I think so. Since I've moved to focus on a technology practice and disputes that arise in some of those narrow contexts, like cybersecurity and data privacy, Utah's been massively progressive when it comes to data and technology. They've passed, of course, that Consumer Privacy Act, but a year or two before that, they'd passed the Computer Abuse and Data Recovery Act. It's a statute that creates some rights, generally for employers who have employees that steal their information when they go to a new employer. And then Utah, before that, had enacted a data breach notification statute. They were kind of in the middle of the pack of the 50 states that now have that type of statute. And then, of course, we've seen them recently enact statutes relating to social media, and then banning TikTok, and then restrictions on social media use by young people, by minors.
So it should just happen in the last month.
Last month. So
fairly controversial.
Controversial, bold, well-reasoned. For the most part, in my view. And the beauty of the U.S. and our system here is there's 50 states who can enact laws that are similar or exactly the same or just do nothing. And so you have this patchwork approach to technology, data, and the way various legislatures think those things should interact and operate and control our lives. So the US, sorry, I'm not from here, but I'm naturalized. And I just have this massive bias in favor of the way our political system and our states are able to govern themselves in their use of technology. Because you get to step back and study the differences, and either personally or as an organization, and then as a country as a whole, take the best parts and hopefully come up with a framework or schemes that work best. I'm getting a bit sidetracked here, Earl. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. And we may come back around and talk about some of those, recent Utah regulations and stuff. One that hits my radar a lot is the Cybersecurity Affirmative Defense Act. Which is, candidly, as we interact with clients and prospects, we find that most don't know about it, but it's actually it can be a really good friend to a business if that business is willing to take a few steps to take cybersecurity and data privacy seriously, and to have ongoing cybersecurity and compliance practices. Then that act can actually save their bacon in case in the case of a breach. So and maybe we'll come back around if there's time to talk a little bit more about those things. But let's start to dig into the meat and potatoes here of the conversation, Romaine. So you've been at this 8 years, and it's a rapidly evolving landscape. One of the things I love about cybersecurity is that it's always morphing. It's always changing. Threat actors and their tactics are changing. Vulnerabilities are changing. It's a lot to keep up with. I won't sugarcoat that, but it does keep it exciting. It keeps you nimble. It keeps you on your toes. It keeps you learning all the time, facing and dealing with new challenges. So, but you've got 8 years of history here, which is probably Well, it is the 8 fastest years of evolution in the threat landscape, and it's cybersecurity law and all that kind of stuff. So let's talk a little bit about what the past is looked like for you, and maybe I know we've had sidebars about some pretty interesting cases, and realizing attorney-client privilege, we can't mention names and things like that, but maybe let's tell our guests a little bit about some of those interesting, crazy, fun kind of cases that kind of blindside you, right?
Yeah, I think a way to explain the evolution or the ever-changing nature of the threat landscape is to talk a bit about ransomware. Ransomware is a modern twist on an old crime. And in this case, the cyber criminals, instead of taking a family member, a spouse, or children hostage in return for payment, they take your organization's data, or they take your access to that data. And the first iteration of ransomware that I dealt with simply involved encryption. And so a threat actor would get into a client's system, and once in there, deploy encryption or lock you out. And for you to get access back, you needed to buy from them the decryption key. And that was ransomware. Maybe my first case was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And all the threat actors did was encrypt your system so you couldn't get in. But they would do enough to be able to enable you to get to a screen that has the ransom demand. And that ransom demand is pay Bitcoin to this account, and we will give you decryption keys, and then the decryption process can take up to 1, 2 to 3 days for you to work through and unlock your own systems for you to be able to start working.
That is again, if you actually get the software from the threat actor, right?
If they actually provide it to you. That is if you don't have any other way to access or break through that encryption, or if you don't have backups. That was the old way of conducting a ransomware attack and having to deal with it. And then a few years
Tell us about ransomware 2.0.
Ransomware 2.0 is basically where the threat actors, rather than just locking you out, they will go into your environment and ferret around to find where the data that's most sensitive to you is, and then exfiltrate it. And then show you what they've exfiltrated, lock you out, and say, pay ransom to this Bitcoin account, or else we're not only going to not give you a way of decrypting that encryption, we're also going to post the data we took on a public website, like GitHub, WikiLeaks. And I believe some of these gangs, some of these cyber criminal groups have set up their own websites to be able to just post the data that they've stolen, that someone hasn't paid to return. Because
that happened to a local prominent university twice in the last 3 years. Actually, the university I went to. It wasn't the one down south you went to. It's public knowledge, right? I mean, it's
it is.
But twice. They had ransomware data exfiltration. The threat actors said, we're going to release all your staff and student data from the last 25 years. So the university said, they said, we're good. We got data backups. We don't need to pay your extortion, right? And the threat actors said, wait a second. We have the data. We're going to post all that data on the dark web. We're going to make it publicly available unless you pay us $500,000, right? So that happened. The university had to pay. Go ahead. I interrupted you, but
that's a good vivid example. It brings to mind another recent example that was had where same processes, exfiltration, encryption, demand, and then what we're seeing in the demand process, unfortunately, is an added layer of torment is if the victim organization decides not to pay because they've got backups and or because for whatever reason they don't want to make that amount or they don't want to embolden, I would say, that nefarious ecosystem, there are threat actors that will notify the victims of the data that's been posted publicly. Or let's say it's in a university context you gave, there are instances where the threat actors have been calling students through their cell phones and or sending them emails, not just to their .edu addresses, but also to their personal emails, and telling them that the universities they go to have lax security and don't care about their personal information. And they will use the instance of the university not paying the ransom as an example. And so I've seen emails where they were posing the questions to the students about, did you know that your university does not care about your personal information?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, just to get the attention of the students, what is this? What are they talking about? And then go into detail about their experience with the university as a criminal group to try and extort, and that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's extortion.
It is extortion.
To try and extort a payment.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's become more sinister, and unfortunately, it's highly profitable.
Highly profitable.
To the point of, you've heard of software as a service.
Yeah.
There's now RAS,
Yep.
or ransomware as a service.
Isn't that crazy?
It's just insane. I mean, it's become an ecosystem that has become commoditized on the dark web.
Yeah.
And certain cyber criminals will simply sell access. Hey, we just dropped malware into this organization.
Yeah.
Anyone want it?
Yeah. You think about, for example, cases like Lapsus, where they find this network of teenage kids,
Yes.
13, 14, 15-year-old kids in their underwear in their parents' basements buying ransomware as a service on the dark web for $2,500 with a hotline, right? Tech support included.
Yep.
We're going to help you deploy your ransomware. We're going to help you get your payments, right? And they do it, right? And their Lapsus was, speaking of sinister behavior, these kids had very little scruples, right? They were doing some pretty sinister kind of stuff and going after, there has been some honor among thieves per se, in the cybercrime kind of circles, that oftentimes they've, most groups have said, okay, well, infrastructure or healthcare and things like that, we don't want to do anything that puts human life at risk. But you've seen an evolution in the past 24 months where some groups are like, we don't care, right? We don't care. We just want monetary gain.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. They're just out to profit, and because the systems that they rely on enable it, and they've been able to do it, and it's going to continue, unfortunately. But we are seeing, with the help of new government strategies, more tightened regulation, and also an attempt by the government to reach out and involve the private sector more in the fight against cybercrime and cyber criminals, because a lot of them are backed or enabled by other countries.
Sure.
There's more of a reach out to the private sector for help. And I think that bridging of the gap between public and private is going to pay dividends. And that we should, over time, see less ransomware incidents, or less ransomware incidents of the kind we've seen.
Yeah.
That have impacted retail, hospitality, healthcare, nonprofits, universities, construction, and so forth. Unfortunately,
even LA school district.
LA school district.
They were taken down for weeks.
The city of Baltimore, the city of Atlanta, multiple
San
municipalities
Francisco, yeah.
have had to deal with it. I hope and see less of that happening, just slightly.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, there potentially being more ransomware attacks on critical infrastructure.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about in the critical infrastructure. That's the scary stuff, right? We saw that with Colonial Pipeline. We saw it with the JVM meets, ransomware, attacks. But so you're referencing, the public-private sort of, partnerships. The Biden administration, was it this year? Yeah, it was this year, just a couple months ago.
Yeah.
Kind of an extension of CISA has, issued a new act. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that's about?
Yeah, you bet. So many of us remember, at least vaguely, Colonial Pipeline ransomware incident that happened in March of 2021. And for us here in Utah, the way we would have learned about it, not directly, but it's just through the news, which is the Northeast suffered a shortage of gas because Colonial Pipeline was hacked and a ransomware was deployed. And demand, I think it was 5 million or more, was made. And for Colonial Pipeline to get access back to their information systems, to the IT, they needed to pay, was what the demand said. But out of an abundance of caution, Colonial Pipeline also shut down its operational technology. Operational technology, or OT, is the computerization of things like pipelines and electrical grids. Those things that aren't just to process our information like our data, but those sensors, those technological capabilities that run stuff, traffic lights, certain renewable energy facilities, and so forth. So back then, March, that was a wake-up call, because in 17 states on the east and south, they went into state of an emergency because they were worried about gas.
There were runs on gas stations. Our prices here in the Western U.S. went up.
Went up. And then that kind of kicked federal government into a higher gear. And about a couple of months later, President Biden issued an executive order that I characterize as basically being, this has got to stop. Being a memo setting forth what federal government was going to do within itself, and then as a way to reach out to the private sector and ask them to do also. And so what you saw over a series of days, weeks, and months for about 18 to 24 months from May of 2021 is all of this new regulation, all of these new standards and guidelines relating to critical infrastructure. And just the way I loosely define in my own mind what critical infrastructure is the government has defined it as being 16 sectors. But in my mind, when I think about those sectors or who may fall into that, I try to imagine there being a shortage on anything that would impact national security and the economy and national prosperity. So 16, some of the easy ones that we can understand are transportation, oil and gas, water and wastewater facilities, financial institutions, education, healthcare. But there are also some sectors that fall into the 16 that include nuclear, the defense industrial base, emergency services. So calling 911, calling a 911 or a dispatch is an example of a critical infrastructure sector or subsector or group that's now governed by these new regulations that were spurred by President Biden's executive order. A lot of these existed, but they weren't as developed or enforced as they are now and as they will be going forward. So if you ask me if you were to say to me, what kind of cybersecurity lawyer are you trying to be? It would be, I'm really trying to be whatever's most relevant in the cybersecurity space. But to me, right now, that is critical infrastructure because of the executive orders, the newness of the laws that are coming, and then also Web3 and blockchain. These new technologies that are also driving relevance for cybersecurity laws.
I want to come back around to Web3 and blockchain and AI. I think that's going to be fascinating for us to chat a little bit about. The other one that and I realize a lot of businesses out there are already aware of this, but the other regulation that anybody who's connected in any way to the DoD supply chain, the Defense Industrial Base, has to be getting familiar with CMMC,
right,
and beginning to get their data security and compliance practices in order, or they will, once that gets locked in and there's a moratorium, right? Then they will lose contracts, and that's even if all you're doing is cleaning the rugs that go into a building, or you're 3 suppliers down the chain that some sort of widget that gets sold to the DoD for an F-Series fighter or something, right? It doesn't matter if you're connected, you're going to have to get CMMC certified, right?
Right.
What do you know about that?
So the CMMC is a maturity model developed that guides, that directs companies that want to do business with the government on what qualifications they need to meet, what their security programs need to include. It refers to the maturity part of it, refers to the numerous controls that go into determining whether you're mature enough as an entity to do business with the federal government, which essentially means whether you have the right type of security for what it is you do for them. And so I can localize and broaden the application of that maturity model a little bit by referring to that new act, that Utah law you discussed, which is the Utah Cybersecurity Affirmative Defense Act. And that act basically created a safe harbor for organizations that meet a certain standard of security. It's another way of saying, look, we realize the threat landscape is complex and ever changing, and that organizations have a hard time keeping up. And they shouldn't be held liable every time there's some kind of breach of their systems. And so it's the legislature's attempt to try and draw the line between what's enough and what isn't. And they said, if you do these things in this statute, that goes at least far enough for you to have a defense if you were to have a breach, lose someone's data, and someone sues you for it.
Yeah.
And this act has as one of the requirements, if you have a written information security program, and that security program uses as one of its frameworks what's called the National Institute of Standard and Technology's Cybersecurity Framework.
NIST, better known as NIST, yeah.
The NIST CSF.
Yep.
If your security program is informed by that, and you get sued, you can say, Judge, you need to dismiss this lawsuit against me based on those particular claims because we comply with this new statute. Yeah. And Utah is one of only a few states that has implemented that. Yeah. Ohio and Connecticut have the same thing. But that NIST standard is referenced heavily within the CMMC standard.
Yeah, exactly. It relies directly on and depending upon, and I'm forgetting, but depending upon which version of CMMC, right? It ties directly to different versions of the NIST standard, right?
Yes.
So the great thing, and for Utah businesses that are tuning in, and not everybody's tuning in from Utah, but for Utah businesses that are tuning in, the thing for Utah businesses to know is that that Cybersecurity Affirmative Defense Act is actually your friend, and it gives you a very easy framework to follow. To give you a defensible position in case of a breach. So if you put together your written information security policy, your WISP,
Yep.
if you are remediating the gaps that are found there, you've instituted controls that are based upon the NIST framework.
Yep.
You have an incident response program, right?
Right.
Or an incident response plan, excuse me. And you're practicing that incident response plan. You're doing drills, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then and annually you're going through that process of vulnerability assessment, truing up your controls and your gaps. Then essentially, something happens, you can go to the court, you can go to the judge and say, hey, look, here's all of our artifacts.
Yeah.
We've been responsible. We've done our job, and a judge has the right to say, you're right. And this case is out the back door. See
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not to say Creative Plaintiffs Counsel might not come up with some other way to file a lawsuit. Sure. The statute protects against tort claims. The main tort claim that we've all probably had some experience with in one way or another is negligence. Yeah. And a negligence claim is based on this idea that an organization has a duty to at least do this much, or at least do certain things so that other people don't get harmed.
Yeah.
So like you walk into a supermarket and you slip and fall because the floor just got mopped. That's not supposed to happen. If you have a sign that says beware of the slippery surface.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So there's, the duty there is just tell people.
Yeah.
It's slippery and it's dangerous.
Yeah.
And so in a cybersecurity context, what this act and statute does is you get to say to a judge, I put the sign out and I said it's slippery and don't walk there, or at least be careful. Yeah. What you're saying in cybersecurity is, Judge, I followed the statute and its guidance on how to be secure and how to have a program that enables that. And I followed the frameworks they suggested. I built out a program that's appropriate for the size and scope of my organization and the type of data we collect. We shouldn't be in your courtroom.
Yeah. And
so it hasn't been tested yet. I'm not aware of it. I know that's been filed.
A historical case.
There's no cases that where judges had to decide if they've met what's required, but that's coming.
Yeah. And we see as multiple states start to adopt, similar regulations and acts that at some point the federal government says, okay, we need to do something here on a federal level, rather than, and particularly, having 50 different consumer privacy acts, for businesses who are doing business in 50 of those states. It's not a sustainable practice for businesses to try to, comply to each and every single one of those.
Yeah.
The chief compliance officer would go out of their mind, right, trying to do that.
Right.
So ultimately, what we need is a federal statute that says, okay, here's how this is all going to work, right, and it's applicable across all states. And then, state privacy acts maybe go away or become minimalized or something. Yeah. But we've got about 15 minutes left here. Okay. So there's so much we can dig into, right? But I think it would be really fascinating for the audience to hear, AI is huge right now, ChatGPT and GPT-4, and everybody's wondering what's going to happen with AI. How's it going to disrupt our world? How's it going to disrupt our employment, right? And of course, Web3 and blockchain have been hot topics for a number of years, right?
Yep.
The last 6 months they've cooled off a little bit just because with economic instability, in general in the U.S. dollar and the U.S. markets, right? Those alternative coins, crypto has suffered a bit. So I've seen a lot of people back away from that stuff a little bit, but they're still going to play a huge role. And look, like what's happening on a what I want to say, on an international basis to move away dependency on the US dollar right now. Makes you wonder what role crypto is going to play in the future, right?
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about that. What's your view of what the future holds in Web3 and blockchain and crypto and in AI?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll preface my comments on those emerging technologies by saying I'm of course interested in all of them as a user and as someone that likes technology and likes the efficiencies and the convenience and just the overall user experience that they all provide, because it's that all those emerging technologies you talk about, they provide enhanced user interfaces and user experiences that are just mind-blowing and very exciting. So I'm interested in those from that standpoint. But then in relation to what I do, I'm interested in those technologies from a pretty narrow perspective. Like I'm interested in the way cybersecurity laws intersect with the way those technologies create problems for security. So, for example, that's been what's been captivating to me about cryptocurrencies. Captivating and disappointing.
Yeah.
Is initially I got into that area to help clients understand how they can properly deploy it and use it within their organizations and their data life cycles, but had no idea at first, and nor did they, how cyber criminals also love cryptocurrency. And as a result, how it's become regulated by such bodies as the Office of Foreign Assets and Control, and how nevertheless there was this push to not have for it to not be regulated. And that to me was a massive mistake. And that's why now cryptocurrency, you won't see me and my colleagues unless our clients have needs relating to that specific Web3 platform or those Web3 platforms. We just don't talk about it as much because we're waiting for the regulation to catch up and make it a good, viable currency option. There's so much else that's exciting in the Web3 space that we can kind of not talk about cryptocurrency for a while. And that's decentralized autonomous organizations, which Utah just passed a statute for.
First state in the union.
First state, yes, the first state in the union to do it in a way that I believe.
A limited DAO, right?
Yes, creates more flexibility and enables organizations to not still be on the hook as if you're a general partner in a partnership if you were one of the founders. And then all of these other tax reasons for that. But my main point on that is, Web3 and blockchain technologies have so many other useful use cases.
Let's just drilling in quick, and we don't have long, but on the Web3, on the crypto front, right, on the cryptocurrency front, last year, and you probably remember these numbers better than I do, but there were tens of billions of dollars stolen in cryptocurrency in total, through blockchain hacks and different exploits, right? And I know you've represented people. I mean, there are there are suits happening, right? Because of those things, and you've represented some of those. You've sued some pretty big names, relative to those. There is, cybersecurity is a real consideration in crypto, and that's, I think, one of the common misconceptions I hear is that people say, well, it's blockchain, it's decentralized, it's you can't hack it, it's secure because it resides everywhere, right? That is absolutely incorrect.
Right. One of these main arguments made by the platforms that provide the services is decentralized. Therefore, we can't be liable and shouldn't be liable. And users understand that when they sign up for our services. We say it in our terms of service. If you look at safety and security parts of those terms of service, they're often vague or short. But there's also an explanation that usually says we're not liable or can't be. So beware of those risks. However, some of the same platforms also have very centralized features to function.
Mm-hmm.
And those centralized features lead to a lot of profit and gains by those platforms.
A lot of them are hybrid Web 2, Web 3.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 And so they blur the lines
Yeah.
in some instances for convenience.
Yeah.
And I think that's changing.
Yeah.
We're seeing some of the major platforms implement security that should have been implemented months, years ago. But because of that, hey, we don't have to, we're decentralized. Because of that argument, they've resisted it. But that happened with eBay, that happened with Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
that happened with a lot of the search engines. And the beginning is they were able to say, look, we just provide a platform. We can't guarantee safety and security on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you experience something bad, sorry, it's not our fault.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that changed for them
Yeah.
pretty quickly. They built up these fraud departments because they also want to make their service trustworthy.
Yeah.
And not have to rely on others or just roll the dice anytime they do a transaction or sell an ape or coin or transfer funds.
Yeah.
You know, so security and safety has a ways to go from a governance standpoint.
Yeah.
But when it gets further and more entrenched and deepened, then I think we'll see crypto come back and make a resurgence, like it's doing in the other blockchain spaces through non-fungible tokens.
Yep.
The big companies are relying on that
Mm-hmm.
for enhanced user experiences.
Yeah.
And decentralized finance is still a very highly touted way of using Web3 blockchain technologies. So
we have some pretty interesting DeFi startups here that are doing
Yeah.
quite well, you know, in
Yep.
Utah. We got about 7 minutes left, right?
okay.
I want to talk more about AI, right? Because I think this is really a fascinating space. Obviously, AI can be and is being and has been used for even the last decade by threat actors. It's been used to hack, you know, it's been used to deploy ransomware. You know, so there are both use cases for AI for nefarious purposes, and there are
Yeah.
use cases for benevolent purposes, right? Which means that, you know, AI will find itself in the crosshairs of the cybersecurity conversation and considerations and data security and privacy, right?
Right.
What do you see there? What do the next several years hold there for AI and cybersecurity?
Yeah. So again, from the cybersecurity standpoint, I can comment a little bit, and I'll also say I'm a little late to the AI train, in that I didn't expect its emergence to be so rapid.
Yeah.
Like you said, it's been around for over a decade, and
Yeah.
I know people who have master's degrees.
Yeah. Well, we've been, not to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
we've been using AI in the identification of threats, for 8 or 10 years through tools that we use as a cybersecurity company, right?
Yeah.
To help us, more efficiently analyze behavior on networks, data and traffic, and then to tell us, okay, look, this looks nefarious, right? This looks bogus. You need to take a look at it. So yeah, it's been around. We've been using it both for, again, it's been used for, for benevolent purposes, and it's been used for nefarious. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
And finish.
Yeah. And what's become more prevalent in my mind about where AI is as of November, as opposed to where it was for my practice 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, is these large language models that have been introduced, and then artificial generative intelligence.
Yeah.
This idea that AGI will eventually be smarter than us and be able to make decisions based on large language models and the inputs and the data that they rely on to get to that point.
Yeah.
And where it's become relevant to me as a practitioner, separate and aside as from my being a user, is threat actors now using ChatGPT, for example, to design malware and to more easily deploy ransomware, which is one example of malware.
Yeah.
And just how that and how scary that is.
Mm-hmm.
And then how that's going to create additional duties for organizations that are victims or have data that threat actors want to get through these through malware that's created by AI.
Yeah.
So what I can see and foresee is organizations having a duty to have AI that fights AI.
Yep. Yep.
And having to deploy or use services. And I see this becoming something that Nexus IT will have to do as part of its security services, is start deploying or using products that detect the misuse of AI.
Yep.
Just as a defense.
Yeah.
So, for example, a crude comparison is to what the state of Utah has done with a written information security program.
Yeah.
They've said, okay, there's all these threats out there and you guys are getting sued when you're not properly prepared for them. So we're going to give you a safe harbor, and that safe harbor is going to include a security program, and that security program is going to need to be informed by NIST.
Yeah.
So NIST has recently come out with the risk management framework, a risk management framework for artificial intelligence.
Yep.
And so just like, the state of Utah has said, use a cybersecurity framework for your security program, NIST has one for AI, and the state of Utah may eventually say, use that framework within your environment. So it's how the threats are evolving. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Means I'm talking too much.
It's your job. You're an attorney.
Yeah. And AI, as it advances in bad ways or in good ways, it will advance in bad ways, then necessitating a step up in its use in good ways.
Yeah.
So providing adequate defenses.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, endpoint security and SOC services, SIM services, tools for all that kind of stuff. Threat analysis, right? The AI in those tools is going to have to continue to evolve at a significant rate, right? And then, okay, so maybe there will be partnerships with LLMs like GPT, right? That enable some of that. The things that, for example, I look out and think about is, okay, supply chain attacks have escalated significantly, in recent years. We think about, Kaseya and SolarWinds Orion, where through SolarWinds Orion, our federal government, other international governments, and a good portion of the Fortune 500 companies around the world were infected with a ransomware through a supply chain attack, one single attack, right? Because they pushed out a software update that included ransomware that went to thousands of organizations and governments. And so I think about, and I'm not trying to give ideas because other people are already thinking about this stuff, but we know that there are already partnerships happening with AI LLMs that are going to be integrated into Office suites, right? That's already happening into browsers. And so what if, say, a threat actor leverages a supply chain attack and leverages the native LLM within an Office suite to gather and collect data about the infrastructure of an organization, right?
Right.
And Intel passes it back or just learns on its own and then looks for the vulnerabilities and, looks to exploit those vulnerabilities and evolves, right, until it's able to exploit, right?
Yeah.
I can tell you today, a fair amount of the hacks that happen, the breaches, the ransomware, they are deployed by bots, right? And some of those bots are AI weaponized. That's less common today, but I see that being a significant evolution that we're going to see happen, and not just from external, not just from outside the network, but if they can penetrate a supply chain, and execute a supply chain attack, then that attack's going to happen from inside your infrastructure, right? Inside your network. Which is kind of a crazy scenario.
I'm seeing a lot of the regulation right now focusing on the misuse of AI in the way people interact and hiring inputs or data sets that don't take into account certain groups that are unfair, or that require things that are discriminatory. But I think what you just talked about, what I fear the most with AI, is just it being able to cause bad accidents or bad incidents. And so not as societal or not as pervasive of viewpoints or polarizing people. There's certainly dangers involved in that. But for me, it's AI being used to shut down oil and gas pipelines, shut down grids, to confuse information, to distort information relating to healthcare, financial information, all of that. So we got to keep doing what we're doing, or we're screwed. And so the legislation's got to keep track. It's in the cybersecurity practitioners, data scientists, those technicians have told me legislation or the government's always 5 years behind. The laws are always playing catch up. And so organizations, that's why there's this movement for the public and private to collaborate more, just to close the gap on that 5 years. Laws take too long.
Right. We're more nimble in the private sector, right? We're able to move quicker.
There's money to be made by being a good defender, and by building software
and being at the cutting edge. No, there's no doubt. Romaine, we're a few minutes over time. I want to thank you so much for being my guest on TechBeat, for being my friend,
you're welcome.
Spending this hour with me. It's been very valuable. I think that the viewers have taken a lot of really great points from this, that a lot of things to think about and go back and ideate around, how they institute some of these ideas within their own practices within their business, right? So again, to our viewership, thank you so much for joining us this hour. We've enjoyed having you on TechBeat. Romaine and I will be at WebCheck Cybersecurity Expo, April 27th. Mallory did post the link to that, so you can go grab tickets in the thread here, or you can go check out my LinkedIn profile. There's more information there about that. Again, keep an eye out for all of the announcements coming up for all the other cool leaders and founders and entrepreneurs that we have coming on TechBeat in the coming months. We appreciate you joining us. We're going to sign off. Everybody have a wonderful afternoon. We'll see you.
See you.